Hello and welcome to this video where I will go through my blueprints in detail and how each one works. So let's start with the blueprints that handle the player animation rotation and update rotation with these two custom events. This first custom event here is the player update animation event, which first leads to this node called the branch node, which handles a boolean leading to a true line and a false line. You will notice that there is this line called a condition, which anything coming in will be handled, and whether the condition is true or false will end up leading to the blueprints that need to be executed. The condition set here is classed as isFalling, and going into it is the character movement, which means it will lead to the true or false line depending on whether or not the character is falling. If you follow this true line here, then it ends up leading to the flipbook, which sets up the falling animation flipbook for my character, Bob. For all these flipbooks you can see the sprite, which is how the character is displayed on screen, and they all reference the same sprite and change it depending on what's going on. For the next one, the blueprint node, getVelocity, is used, which is essentially how it measures where the character is on the plane. The vector length converts it to a float, which allows the greater than value to read it, which goes into the condition part of the branch. From the true line it means that the value is greater than, which is going left or right, and from the false it's going up. On the true it will set Bob's running animation, and from the false it goes into Bob's jump. Next let's move on to the player update rotation. To start with, this is the custom event for player update rotation, which goes into a compare float, which is where it will see if the float is greater or less, and what is being inputted into it is a get velocity on the x-axis, which when inputted is compared between the greater and less values. You can also see the target, which is on self and not connected to another node, which just targets the BP_player blueprint, since that is the self. Once it goes through, the value of the x-axis must be more than 0 in order to be in one direction, and if it is less than 0, then the rotator flips it by 180 degrees and keeps it that way until the player goes right. The running animation then plays continuously. The set control rotation gets the player controller, and then the make rotator that is connected to it sets what position the player needs to be in. Next is the add coin event. Next is the custom event for the add coin script, which gets from the coin collected integer, which when a coin is collected, then it gets updated on the coin counter on the HUD and tells the player that a coin has been added to the total collected. There is also a construction script on the HUD here that casts to the coin collected value on BP_player, which is a bit like reading it, and updates the text by 1 every time a coin is collected. This is a super simple one, but there are some inputs that I set up in the editor settings which allows the jump to work with both keyboard and controller. With this I added an input action with the name jump, and after any of those keys that are binded to the input action go into the jump action, and after that it plays a sound set as SC_jump. On this I have decided to do the same thing, where I have set up another input action which is set to the Z key on keyboard and the X button on an Xbox controller. This means once that button is pressed, the fireball launches as a scene component and launches wherever the player is with Get World Transform. Next here is my pause menu. To begin with, when this is pressed on, it goes through one of two options, with the first being to set the actual pause menu up by setting the game as paused before setting up the input mode as UI while using the Get Player controller. There is then a boolean after it that connects to the Get Player controller, which is in UI mode and ends up showing the mouse cursor. Afterwards, the Create Widget node adds a WBP pause menu widget in and connects onto a reference to the pause menu before adding it to the viewport and playing the pause menu sound. Once the pause menu action is pressed again, it first unpauses the game before setting the game to game-only mode, which goes into a boolean that is targeting the Get Player controller and disables the mouse cursor. The pause menu reference then comes into play, with it being removed from the screen before going back to the gameplay. This is an event any damage, which is set up in this case to take away damage by any amount from 100 health on the player. Next it goes into a branch with a condition that checks if the player health goes equal to or below 0, and if the player health is 0 or less, and if the player is not yet dead, to then execute the death screen. The death screen works by setting the isDead boolean to true and then displays the WBP Game Over widget before going through the Show Mouse Cursor that then activates the mouse cursor before going into the Set Input Mode UI only, which means it goes into a mode where you can click on menus and can't control the character. After that it gets the Set Dead screen WBP and adds it to viewport to then set the game to paused and the death sound plays lastly. This is the last blueprint used in the BP_player character. Now this was the first bit of blueprinting I did where I used an input axis to set how the player moves by using the greater and less conditions. The first condition is to see if the player is moving on the key set as the +1.0, which is right, and then goes to the activated moving right boolean before setting the movement of the character as +1.0. If the character is moving left, then it looks to see if the -1.0 key is being pressed, which is left, and does the same as the right key, but in reverse with the boolean being set as false for move right. This is what allows the character to move the way it does.